Okay, so it's rapid application development. It says lesson 13, but again, if you notice, I'm kind of a lesson off. It's lesson 12 actually, so 12th lesson. Maybe it would be chapter 13, 14 in a book if I had one. But it's lesson 12, part 1. And we're talking about a couple things today. One of them is going to be these additional topics in C# that we're going to use some of them for our exam, which is coming next week. So again, next week, exam, 2.5 hours approximately. I'll tell you that you're going to be dealing with some similar stuff as you did the first time, right? There'll be some forms you have to fix. You won't have to do an external document. You will need to do internal documentation, like I spoke about last week. But more or less, anything that I've shown you up until now is kind of will be fair game for me to put on the exam. Probably won't put it all, and there's some stuff I can tell you I won't do. Like I won't make you do any kind of printing. That makes no sense, right? But and we'll talk about other things I won't do with you. But today what we're going to be talking about is some additional controls that you're probably going to need for your exam. And some stuff that I just kind of added in here because I think it's neat for you to know, right? Like to take away from the course, right? So we're going to talk about scroll bars, and I think it's kind of cool from a user input perspective, right? Drag and drop. You're going to need to know drag and drop for the exam, right? So even though we're talking about it today, it's going to be on the video. I want you to take a look at it. We're going to talk about how to do it. I have examples for you, so you can actually look at example code, how to do it, and I'll even hint at how to make it even cleaner for yourself to make it easier. I would recommend when we talk about stuff that you're going to need for the exam that you prepare and you bring in some sample code, some code snippets that you could use. I'm totally cool with that because in the real world you would have a toolbox of code snippets that you could like copy and paste and then adjust them for what you need to do for your projects, right? We're going to talk about different kinds of validation that may be on the exam. I'm kind of playing with it, whether I should make you do something like that or not. We'll go over it today. And also, a multi-document project, we're going to talk about it. Probably won't be on the exam. I probably won't. But if it's going to be there, I'll send you guys a note saying, yes, I've modified everything. The challenge with multiple document projects and with parent and child forms, sometimes, depending on the system that you're working on, it's a big resource pig, right? And occasionally it'll crash your Visual Studio 2013 or 2012, right? So for me to get you to do this and then it crashes in the middle of your exam might be really annoying, right? So it's okay in a development environment if you're doing it and occasionally you have a crash, just reboot. But in an exam, it's just a big time waster. So again, in my mind, I'm trying to figure out if it's something that's worth doing, especially with the scope and the time you have. We'll talk about toolbars and different kinds of toolbars, status bars, and different icon strips that we're gonna talk about how to do that today because we really haven't talked about icons at all, which are to me. I mean, I use icons when I do applications more than anything else. Like menus are cool, but I like shortcuts and icons, right? Because it's just faster, right? We'll talk about the tab control. You're probably going to need to know this one for sure. So again, on this kind of like little addendum, I'm kind of putting things together that you're probably going to need to know. We're going to talk about XML files. I'll show you how to use them. You won't need to do those on the exam for sure. And we'll talk about using Install Shield. And I recommend now, while I'm talking, that you download Install Shield from Flexora, right? If you go on, there's a Install Shield limited edition. If you want to play along with me near the end, it takes about 60 megs, right? So it'll take some time to download. You have to register as well, just letting you know. And when you do register, you get this. You'll get like kind of a validation code that they'll give you. You put it in, and I think you're good for 60 days or something like that, which is enough for our little course, right? But the reason why I want you to do is I want you to try and put together a little Install Shield project because I think it's, in the real world, we use it a lot of times. We make like setup programs to set up our code that we write, and it's a good experience. Check it out. So start doing it now if you want. It's Install Shield limited edition. by Flexora. So let's look at scroll bars. And I mean, again, they're called different things in different UIs, right? In C#, it's scroll bars. There's two types. There's a horizontal scroll bar, and there's the vertical scroll bar. And if you notice here on this screenshot that I took, this is the new 2012 Visual Studio way of on Windows 8, what they look like. So again, you have your vertical and your horizontal scroll bars. And what I would use them for me is if I was going to make a scroll bar any useful at all, it would be something where I need to kind of limit a user's input somehow, right? Like let's say, for example, you want to quickly dial up or dial down a value, like you're creating some kind of a color picker, a custom color picker, or a custom number that you want a user to be able to dial up and dial down fairly quickly without him actually putting anything in, like no input. Sometimes these kind of controls are good when you have some kind of touch controls. Like for example, if you have an iPhone or an Android phone, and instead of typing in a number on your phone as you're going, it's better just to dial up a number, right? Like actually touch up a number or whatever. And so these kind of controls are good, but they have to be big enough from a mobile perspective to fit your finger. On a desktop, again, I have them as limited use. They could be used also to scroll up and scroll down. For example, the screen, any kind of data on the screen and so on. Sometimes they're used for that as well. But typically what you can do is you can assign numbers. And the way you can do this, if you go to the H scroll bar control and the V scroll bar control on your toolbar, when you actually drag and drop them in, it produces these different controls. And there's different properties. One of them is the minimum value, as an example. In this case, it starts at 0. The default values are 0 and 100, but you could change these values so it works for you. So if you're making a scroll bar, so that way you dial up a value for some kind of other box, you can adjust the scroll bar instead of having the user provide input, physical input. And again, if you click between the scroll bar itself, for example, if I touch the top of the arrow, and this is how they work, right? You'll get a small change. You'll affect a small change property, which the default going back is 1. So it'll go by 1 at a time. You can of course adjust those values by changing the properties for the scroll bars, right? But if you click in the middle in the gray area, you affect the large change property to work, and the default is 10, right? So every time you touch the middle of the gray area, the scroll bar will jump 10 units at a time. Right? But again, you can change that value to make it whatever you like. You can also set a default value. Like for example, the value property is whatever you want it to be preset to. So for example, let's say you want a scroll bar to have a certain value out of 100, like 30 out of 100 or 40 out of 100. And again, these are really useful if you're doing something like changing color values, describing alpha, transparency, those kind of things. They're useful for those kinds of changes, instead of you typing in a physical value, where you can quickly dial up and dial down and preview your changes as you go. So there's really no click event for scroll bars, but there are two other events that are really useful. One of them is the value changed event, and there's also a scroll event. So when you're actually scrolling, that creates it triggers that scroll event, so you can actually do something when you're actually scrolling, and you can also do something while you're doing a value change. So in fact, maybe what you can do is, as an example, as you're scrolling, you can produce a preview, and then when you do your value changed, then you can affect the actual physical change, the permanent change. There's different things you can do with these event handlers. And just before I go on to drag and drop, let's do an example. So here we are in Visual Studio, and I will open up. And again, these lessons examples are on your Blackboard. I've kind of put them up there. This one's called Lesson 13, Scroll Bars. So the form itself is called Scroll Form, and I've put a couple of these scroll bars, just like you see here. We have horizontal values. And I also have a couple of invisible text boxes for now. I've got no borders in those two text boxes. So I kind of did it twice. I kind of did it here and here. They kind of have the same values. And what you do is, I've set it up so that way when you run the code, it starts off and it tells you what your window size is, 300 by 300. And if I scroll, and this is the weird thing about the vertical one, if I scroll down, it just automatically changes my window size. And if I scroll across, it changes it that way too, right, in both places. It also works if I actually physically, pull the window down and across, it changes the bars automatically. So I've kind of made it that way too, right? So the code's there for you to look at. It's just an example of the scroll bar, a silly example, but at least it tells you, one possible use for a scroll bar, right? And if I was going to look at the code very quickly, one thing I did use in this particular case was when the size changed, then what I did was I used this dot width, and again this dot width would look at the actual form size, the form width. When I say this on a form class, I'm affecting the form itself. So I'm saying the width of the form, I'm converting it to a string, and I'm inputting it into the text box, right? And the same thing with the height. You can get the form's width and height by doing that. So that's one thing. And I also did, it's the other way around. When I change the actual form itself, right? For example, and when it's loaded up, I kind of initialize everything. And when the form itself is changed, I actually update everything as well. So both of those things, like for example, the scroll form itself, which is the form, this form. When the size changed, I trigger another event, and I actually update the text boxes to show when I'm changing the form what the actual values would be, right? So it's I've kind of put it all in here for you to take a look at if you're interested. Again, not really exciting, but it's at least an option for you to use. I may or may not use this on the exam. Again, I'm currently in the process of modifying it, modernizing what I had before. So that's why I can't be certain as to what's going to be on the exam yet. Okay. Drag and drop definitely will be on your exam. You need to know this stuff. This is a little bit weird, this drag and drop stuff, and I'll tell you because there's going to be 3 different event handlers you're going to have to write for each drag and drop. It's really weird, okay? And we'll talk about how they work in a second. Okay, so, and here they are. You've got the mouse down event. So when you mouse down on a particular draggable or a control that you can drag and drop from, right? There's the DragEnter event, and then there's the DragDrop event. So there's 3 different events you have to write for each drag and drop event, if you will, or the possibility of doing it. We'll talk about how they all work in a second. Again, you have your source, where you're dragging from, and this is very similar, by the way, to other drag and drop type of UIs, whether you're using jQuery or on the web or something else. It's very similar to this. I think actually C# and VB and the whole .NET environment may be a little bit more complex than you would normally see on from a web perspective, because you do need these 3 event handlers we'll talk about, right? So again, you do in the mouse down event, you're gonna kind of put together this DoDragDrop method. You need this method in the mouse down event, right? You're also going to have to describe this allow drop property in the target, okay? If the allow drop property of the target is not set, you cannot do a drag drop event to the target location. So every target box that you're dragging to has to have this allow drop property to be set to true. It's got to happen, okay? In the mouse enter event, and this is optional, you can set the cursor to give you feedback. So for example, if you enter an area that's drag droppable, you can change your cursor, right? So to kind of provide feedback for the user to say, okay, this area you're ready to maybe you're changing your cursor to a hand as opposed to leaving it as a pointer, right? To kind of indicate that there's a possibility they can do some drag and dropping. And then when you actually go to the target, you have to, on the target control, you have to use the DragEnter event, right? And you have to basically set the type of drag drop effect. That's the only thing you do in this DragEnter event, right? And you choose whether it's a move or copy, and there's other ones as well. But move is typically the biggest one. You don't typically copy things across when you drag and drop. When you drag and drop, you physically drag the control over and drop it somewhere else, right? When we talk about drag and drop, we're not actually physically moving controls. We're dragging and dropping data. That's when I talk about drag and drop, that's what I'm talking about here. Dragging and dropping data from one control to another control, okay? Then the third event, so first event is some kind of mouse down on the source. Then you have on the target, you have a DragEnter event. And then you have a DragDrop event, when you actually physically let go of the mouse, right? Almost like this mouse up event as well. And when you drag drop, the code has to be, basically say, okay, once I've done my drag drop, what happens? And we'll describe, there's different options. So here's the general form, right? On the DoDragDrop, this is what you put on the source object. So let's say, for example, you have a control, hint, hint, some kind of ability score, right? And you're dragging and dropping, right, some kind of a score from one side to the other, right, as an example, right? There's different ones you can do. There's different effects. You can do a copy, a move, or none. Now, none makes no sense because that means there's no effect, right? You either have to do a copy or a move, and chances are it's going to be a move, all right, when you do a drag drop, right? So let's say, for example, you're dragging and dropping a name. The text box has a name, and you're dragging the name over to the target. So you're going to have to do this. Whatever the name text box is, you use the DoDragDrop method, and then you specify what text or what's the string that you're moving over, as an example, and then the type of event. You've got to say, well, it's a drag drop effects. It's going to be a move type. So you got to specify. The source has to be specific. It has to match the target in this particular case. And you know what? I think there could have been a cleaner implementation in C# than the way it's done here. But this provides you with a lot of different kind of control, right? Okay, so here's on the mouse down event, here's an example of your source. All right, so here's an example of source code here for you. So you're in the mouse down event of this name text box. First thing you do is you kind of select the text automatically, and then what you do is you do this DoDragDrop, and in the selected text box is the selected text is the one you're going to copy, and then you're moving. You're telling the your code that you're doing a move effect, and then you're going to clear the text box. This is typically what you do. Yes.
So the source and destination must be the same type. Source data and destination location must be the same type.
Yes, but you don't have to, as long as the destination can accept the data copied to it. For example, let's say you're moving from a label to a text box. That's okay, because you're still taking text data from the label and moving it to the text box, right? But it's got to be something that the receiving control can accept. Like if you're moving an image, right? You're going from an image box to another image box. If you're doing that, then yes, then obviously it's got to be able to receive an image, right? Otherwise it won't work. So the target. So you got your mouse down event on the source. On the target, again, you have to make sure that the target has this allow drop property be true. That has to be true. And we'll go through an example in a second after this. You have to use the DragEnter event, all right? That basically sets the type of event that you're going to use, and the DragDrop event handler that executes the action after the drop takes place, right? So here's an example of the DragEnter event, and all you put in here is the type of effect. You say E, which is the type of drag drop or drag event args. The E component basically says this is the effect, and I'm specifying that it's going to be a drag drop move, just like I did in the source. So the source and the target have to be the same, or else you'll have some weird effects going on, right? And again, this is where I say the implementation for this could have been a little bit easier from a C# perspective. Why they have both these same events together? Well, because it provides you different options, right? Different control, more control. And here's the drag drop event itself. So fine, I'm doing the drag drop, and what am I doing? I'm using this get data method, right, to get the data from the receiving object. So basically, I'm taking this data, and I'm using the data, and I'm transferring it over to the, in this particular case, a list box, right? But it could be to any kind of control. So, I mean, again, you could have the source could be some kind of text box. The receiving control could be a list box, a label, something that would accept the same kind of text if you're dragging it from a text control. And here's some your drag and drop examples. Your mouse down, your drag and drop, your drag drop event, and your drag and enter. So these 3 events you need for each box that you're going to be dragging and dropping. So, example, if you have 6 boxes, hint, hint, that you'll have to drag and drop, how many events would you need?
6 times 3.
18 events you need to code, right? This is silly for you to do this by hand, right? A lot of this code is duplicated. What could you do to cut? Was that?
Make it just pass itself to a common handler.
There's ways of doing it so you can use one handler. The challenge is you have to say which of the source, which is your source. You can identify. We did this before in a previous lesson where you can actually cast the source, right? To say the name of the source text box or the source, what is it, and then use a switch statement to kind of switch out the source and the destination by using basically, instead of making 18 different handlers, you can use only 3. Hint, hint, work it out before the exam, and it'll save you a hell of a lot of time. You do it during the exam time, it's a big waste of your time, and it's just going to cause you not to be able to finish. All right? But I'm giving you the solutions kind of here, as it is. All right? Again, this is all up on Blackboard. It's nothing that you have to actually copy down on your own. And I'm going to give you an example right now. So here's Visual Studio. And again, this source code's in Blackboard, or on Blackboard. And we're going to open up DragDrop, which is the project that's up on Blackboard. And then here you go. You have a couple of text boxes, your sources and your destinations. Let's see how the program actually functions that I've written here. Okay? So automatically you see that one of the sources is immediately selected, or the text is automatically select all on it as the form loads, right? If I click on it and I drag over, if you notice my mouse changes as I move into an area where I can't drop. It shows me that I can't drop to this location. If I let go, my code should not be, or my original data shouldn't be gone, right? And this is an issue because if you make it so that when I drag drop on the form itself, that something happens, the data will just disappear. So that's bad. So be careful of that. Second, if I drag over an area that I can drop into and let go, 2 things happen. My data moves over. It looks like to the user that the data has moved over to this destination source, or destination tool box here, control, right? What if I do this? If I drag over an area that's already got data, well, I've coded it so that they swap. Okay, you can do that. How? We're going to take a look at that because there's some tricks to doing this, right? Same thing if I do this. If I kind of put this back over here, everything's fine, right? One thing I can't do is I can't take the data from here and put it back over here because I haven't coded the source controls as do drag droppable or drag droppable. We'll take a look at that in a second. However, I have made it so that I can swap destinations. So I can do one of these. Even though they're both destinations, they're also sources. So just an example I put together for you guys. So there's a lot of examples of what to do. I haven't optimized the code because that would just be too easy for you guys just to copy and paste from here. But I got to give you some challenge. But let's take a look at the code anyway. So you can see that there's a minimum here. There's got to be a minimum of how many? A minimum of 6 events to take care of these locations, right? A minimum, right? So I'm using a source. I got a destination, another source, another destination. That's 6 events so far. And if I'm doing source, destination, and source, destination, that's another 2 more events, right? So at least 8 events that I have to code for these 4 text boxes. Let's take a look. And I'll try and make this a little bigger for you guys to see. Okay, so one thing I did do, I made a class variable that I kind of cast as a text box, right? So it's a kind of a default text box, and I kind of coded it as source text box, right? I've instantiated it as a new type of text box, but it doesn't. There is no text box that I'm adding to the form. It's just I've instantiated an object called text box or source text box. Okay, and I'm doing that because when I do a mouse down event on my source text box 1, which is this one, this is my source text box 1. I do a mouse down event. I do two things. I select all on the source text box, and I also take my class variable and I set it to a reference to the text box that I'm dragging from, right? There's a reason why I'm doing this. You don't have to do this, but I wanted to do this so that way when I swap with the other control, I know where I'm coming from. If you don't do it this way, you're going to have a lot of other ways. There's other ways of doing it, but less tricky or more difficult to do. So I select this DoDragDrop. I tell them I'm taking my text from my text box, and then what am I doing? A move, just like I've shown you in the examples, right? Here's my destination. I've kind of grouped them together: source 1, destination 1, right? Here's my drag enter. The only thing I need for here, and by the way, this is always the same line of code. If you guys can't do this one, this is bad, right? This is like the exact same line of code that's duplicated over and over again, right? E effect, the effect, and the drag drops effects dot move. And if you notice, here's the other one, move, right? And there's like it's exact same. It's the exact same drag enter event, pretty much. I've just duplicated over and over again. Here's your drag drop. I say this: my class source text box that I defined up on my class, which is the generic source text box, it doesn't exist in the form yet. I make it equal to my destination text box now, right? My destination text. I've kind of set it to that. And then what I say is my destination text box text is equal to the. I'm using the getData method and taking the text from the value that I've dropped into the text box. Okay, so I'm doing there. I'm swapping the text. I'm saying, take my text wherever I am here in my destination and swap it back to my source. Right? I don't have to do that. This is just the effect that I wanted. Right? Otherwise, there's no way of knowing which source you're coming from. And I do it over and over again. These are the exact same lines of code. Like the only thing that's changed is my my destinations and my sources. So, example, source text box 2, right? As an example, as opposed to source text box 1. Easy to code a solution to use a common event handler. All right. I would challenge you to try and do this again beforehand. Worst case scenario. Worst case scenario. You're going to need 3 for every source and destination. Okay. Worst case. So be prepared at least with that, and then what you can do is you can change the code to match what you're going to need at the time, right? As opposed to typing it on your own, right? What I mean by that is you copy and paste your code snippet, and then you modify the code so it matches your controls on the form that you're using, right? So you don't have to type it by hand or look it up. That makes no sense. So again, I'm telling you one more time, you're going to have drag and drop. Please look at this. Think about this as something that you're being asked to implement by the client, and you need to do it by next week. You need to brush up on how to do it. Okay? There's ways. One thing is if I want to change my my mouse enter event, like for example, if I do a mouse down, right? When I kind of hover over my my source text box as an example, right? I should really try and show the user, and this is something I haven't implemented here, I should show the user as I enter the my source text box that my mouse changes, right? That my mouse changes into a hand or something. I haven't done that. So why don't we do that now? So 2 things are going to happen. I've got to click on my source text boxes here, and I can click on the event. And there's different kinds of mouse events. One thing I want to do is when I use my mouse enter event, when I enter into this source text box here, I'm gonna create an effect, right? So here I'm gonna just double click. It's gonna create this source text box 1 mouse enter event. And all I wanted to do here is change my mouse cursor, right, to something else, right? So let's try this out. If I don't know what I'm doing, I'm just creating a you know, I'm just out of my brain trying to figure it out. I can say cursor, right? Cursor dot, you know, maybe equals, and then I could do that. That might work, right? Maybe I could set my cursor to something else, right? I got to figure out how this cursor thing works. Well, the best thing, if I don't know how to do this, there's two ways to do this, right? I can hover over and it's going to say, it might give me the code, right? If I don't know how to figure it out. The other way I could do it is I can go to my actual form, and if you look at the control, right now the cursor is set to I-beam. So I can set it in two places. I can set it at runtime, or I can set it at design time, right? My view is it's probably easier to set it at design time because there's no need to make any kind of event, right? Right now, when I enter this box, the cursor is an I-beam. I could change it simply to make it whatever I want, right? I can make it the hand, right? Or I could use this mouse enter event, going back to the control, right? And I could set it to a hand. So I could say cursor, as an example, you know, equals to, and which cursor is it? It's got to be the cursor that belongs to the text box. That's the first thing I got to do. The source text box 1, as an example. Here's my control dot cursor. That's the cursor, right? And it's going to be equal to something, right? So that's one thing I got to do. I can't do, I can't kind of put another, you know, a control here, like copy handle or whatever. So I got to equal it to something. That's the first thing. And I can, again, you can look up how to do it online, but I don't recommend you putting an event handler in here like this. I think it's better to do it at design time myself. You could do it by programmatically as well, but why if you don't have to? So let's go back and just do it like this. So again, I look over at on the cursor, and I change from I-beam to hand, right? And now I'm going to erase the event because I don't need it, right? Because that's my mouse enter event, right? Here it is. And again, to get rid of the event, just delete it. All right, and when I run it, it kind of acts the same way, right? So as I enter my box, it becomes a hand. If I leave my box, you know, as an example, and I probably need some kind of feedback for the destination, right? Because I want to be able to kind of show, right now, I mean, it doesn't show anything when it's just an I-beam, right? Which means I can probably type, which isn't true because I've made it read-only in this particular example, right? So that's kind of a wrong cursor too, from a feedback perspective. Right, so let's just get out of here, go back, go to my destination, and then let's look up cursors here too. And maybe there's another cursor that's more contextual. Right, so instead of I-beam, let's see. Should we use the hand again? That might be something. We're not going to use no, because no means that you can't do it. The cross, the weight cursor, you know, as an example. There really isn't anything else that's applicable, right? But we do know that we can also drag from the destination. So a hand isn't a bad idea either. So let's use the hand here as well. So again, if I start it now, I've got a hand here and I've got a hand here, which indicates to the user there's something different about these two text boxes, and they're just not regular text boxes you can type in. However, if I go down the other ones that I haven't modified, I see that the cursor is an I-beam again, right? So again, that doesn't make any sense to just change all that as well. So we can highlight both of them, right, and then change I-beam for both of them to hand. And again, if you want to, there's also ways of making your own custom cursor in the real world, but it's not always necessary. Again, so if I run this now, and again, depending on where I drag or touch, it looks like my hand is a hand right now. Okay. The only thing that changes when I do a drag-drop event, it changes to this this draggable or droppable area. If I go here, it says no. Right.
So if you drag and pull it out, even though it's set to like clear the text box, and you don't drop it anywhere, it'll just stay where it was.
If you say it to clear the text box, and if it's like, for example, let's say I make my form, because you can make the form itself drag droppable, right? So if I say, if the form itself is like, or if it's a container, like for example, let's say, I'm trying to think of a scenario. Actually, I have a scenario. If, let's say, for example, in the form itself, I'm using a container, right? Like let's say a panel, right? So I use a panel as a container. So here I'm going to just drop a panel in here, right? So here's my panel, and I'm just going to put it on the form so we can see it, but it'll be kind of off the form here like this. So here's a panel. And if you notice the panel itself, if I scroll down, right, it doesn't really have a drag droppable event, right? So we're okay here. It's not gonna cause us to have a problem. Maybe this is not the right one. Just check one more.
We were looking at the events though.
Yeah, hold on. Because okay, that will work. So let me just get rid of this for a second. Yeah. 1 second, guys. So let's say on the form, okay, forget the container. On the form, I put allow drop is equal to true as an example, right? This is a problem, right? Or if I have a container, but somehow my allow drop property is true for whatever reason, right? So if I run it now, if I leave it here, sometimes what will happen is because my allow drop property is true, right? It sometimes will wipe away if I code it wrong. It'll wipe away when my my source control, because if you look at the examples that I've given you, let's go back here. What am I doing? As soon as I do my mouse down event, I'm doing a clear, right? That doesn't make any sense. That means if I fail to do my drag drop, my original code is clear. It's gone, right? I don't want that. That doesn't make any sense for me. So that's why I've removed that situation altogether. Because if I drag and drop it in an area where I can't drag and drop, my mouse down event still has fired, which means all the code in this event is going to go, right? Including my clear, whether I've done a successful drag drop or not. So that's why I took it out.
You want to do it in like DragEnter
That's what I would do.
or DragDrop.
Yeah. So here's so the actual solution. If I go back to the solution here, right? Let me just take this back and put this back to where it was. So your allow drop on your form or your container should be false. First of all, shouldn't be there because that might confuse things. It might cause an error or some kind of weird effect that you don't want. And then if you actually do if I was going to code it differently, so here's my mouse down. If I was to put a clear here, as soon as I did my mouse, it would be gone, right? Whether I was successful or not. But to me, the clear should be anywhere you drag drop. The actual drag drop event occurs. Now I don't do a clear. I do a swap because that's the effect I want. But let's suppose that I don't want that. And here, I'll do this on destination 1 as an example. I'll just undo this, right? And I'll say, well, you know what? I want my source text box, wherever my source text box is. This is why I have to use that generic source text box. I want my text, or I want it to be clear, sorry. I want to clear my source text box, wherever that is, right? So this is what the effect would be. Here's my destination. I run it now. Here's source, destination, and then it clears this. And now, I can't swap back, right? Because it clears the effect. See, it doesn't swap back, it just clears it, right? So to me, I didn't find that was really cool. I didn't want that to happen. And that's why I changed it to a swap instead of a clear, because it made more sense to me. Right? But again, you can code it the way you like. I coded it this way because I found that I wanted to swap my data, right? But maybe there's going to be situations where you don't want to swap your data. You want to move it, physically move it from here to there. Right? Not swap it. And there isn't a swap event for drag and drop. There isn't that. So I had to create my own. Any questions around drag and drop? Because I think this is kind of, again, this is one of the sections that you need to know. It's good to put together your own little code snippets. You can code it so that it's more efficient, obviously, than this. Worst case scenario, again, I'll say it one more time. 3 events for every source and destination. 3. Okay. So if you have 6 boxes, strength, intelligence, wisdom, some kind of weird thing like that, who would put that in your bloody exam anyway? Again, right? But let's just say you had that. You know, you'd have 18 different events you'd have to code. That's a waste of time. I'm telling you in advance. Figure it out before you get there.
You know what I think the exam should be?
Oh.
Make a form
Make a form.
Yeah, and just load it.
It's hard.
It is. It's very hard. We're probably gonna need all 2.5 hours.
Oh, I'm sure.
It's all hardcore, right?
That's hardcore, man. Hardcore.
Except for Tom was like, okay, make a form in C++. There's no GUI design.
Yeah.
So we're going to pause right here.